everyone. Welcome to this performance and growth assessment training. My name is Rose. I am a people business partner here at GitLab, but I'm also joined by other people business partners, Juliana, Carol, and Denise. And also we have Brittany Roth on the call from Total Rewards to answer any questions you might have as part of the first session of this, or the first part of this session. So I'm going to walk through the agenda document really quick and the agenda for today. So as pre-work, we've asked every participant to review the slides, and we even recorded a video with some content. So we're not going to walk through the slides. I did want to tap into the timeline real quick. So right now we're in the start of Q3, August, September timeline. We are recommending an informal performance and growth conversation with the goal to become more comfortable with talking about growth and to assure alignment prior to the formal assessment in Q4. So big jump over then to next quarter would be in November that we would formally assess performance and growth, and we will use the performance and growth matrix. We'll go through calibration sessions, and it's really more of a formal approach compared to what we would be doing in August and September. And then in December, the matrix results will be communicated to team members. And in February, we have, and this will all feed into annual compensation review. And in February, we have the annual compensation increases finalized and communicated. So that was a quick timeline for now. The rest of the agenda for today is to have a bit of Q&A based on the slides and the video, or each process changes. We had a session yesterday, yesterday. For me it was yesterday, but for other people it might be today, to answer some questions. So if maybe you want to review those before adding in a question. After the Q&A, we'll go into breakout rooms to discuss scenarios, and I will give a bit more explanation about the breakout rooms after we jumped from Q&A. I'm going to review the agenda doc on any questions that were put in there. I don't see any questions in the agenda, but I'm going to pause if anybody has a question on the material, slides, changes they want to vocalize. All right. Some silence. Is there anything other PBBs, Total Rewards want to add? Something I forgot before we go into breakouts?
No, I think you gave a good overview. Thanks, Rose. And yeah, this leaves more time for the breakout sessions and having those conversations. So there might be some questions then that we can catch up on when people come back.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry, I'm not on video. This is Tim Eidecker. Slide number 16 speaks briefly about the key talent identification. Certain team members have been identified as key talent, which I think is fantastic. Noticing about 10% of the population is on the slide. Do you know if GitLab has plans to increase or decrease that number in the next 12 months? That percentage of population?
That's a good question, Tim. The 10% is not a hard limit, so that's something I did want to call out. We have not discussed any changes to that percentage or those criteria, so it's really as is in the slides. I find it hard to say if that would be remaining the same for the next 12 months. However, as it stands now, we're planning not to make any changes to those numbers.
Got it. Thank you, Rose.
Cool. Megan, you have a question.
Yeah, I was struggling a little bit with the section of the template for the measuring growth, those 4 factors. And I know I talked to my manager a little bit about how to address those, but I was wondering if you could maybe provide a little more guidance. Is that section like, are we intended to pick like one that perhaps they aren't the best in and they need to focus in that growth area? Do we address all 4? Just maybe a little bit more guidance on that, if you wouldn't mind, Rose, please.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So the pillar of growth, or the definition of growth, makes up of those 4 pillars. So we would recommend to use all pillars and not pick 1 or 2, because growth, the definition of growth, is made up of all 4 pillars. In our handbook, we have added a few examples or questions you can ask under each pillar to sort of holistically review where people or where team members are at in terms of growth. So the recommendation would definitely be to use all pillars and not pick 1, because then you would be missing out on a part of the definition of growth.
Okay, I got you. So if they are meeting, if you will, that particular one, just comment on that and say like, hey, you're in a great spot with this growth area, but then this pillar is where you need to focus. So include all 4, but kind of differentiate that. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And admittedly, it's been a little bit since I reviewed the handbook page, so I'll go back and double check. There might be some updates there. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a great question indeed. I think you can review it as well with like performance is made up of different pillars as well, or like about job, family responsibilities, remote working competencies and values. I think like these 4 pillars make up what growth is. Yeah.
Makes complete sense. Thank you, Rose.
Perfect. Cool.
I have a question. So is the tool going to be open all the time? Meaning like, is it open before the official assessment where we have sort of, evaluation of compensation, and then we fill it out and submit it? Or is it something that is available throughout the year to continuously adjust as you're working through career conversations and growth conversations?
Good question. Jonathan, just a clarification, you're referring to the performance and growth assessment tool, right? Is that the tool you're referring?
Yes.
Exactly. All right. So how we've done it last year and the way sort of the tool is set up is to open rounds and close rounds and sync the input to Bamboo HR after like calibration sessions, etc. So that's the way the tool is set up. So there wouldn't be it wouldn't be the goal to keep it open for a longer time, because that would be getting in the way of like actively calibrating, syncing to Bamboo HR, and making sure like to really formalize and finalize those inputs. So currently it would be a tool that is only open for a certain period of time, and your people business partner will be working with your group in order to open those rounds, close those rounds, and inform you of the right dates to make your input. That being said, I do think that performance and growth and checking in on performance with your team members is essential, right? So we recommend to check in on performance and growth over, well, at least on performance, but also on growth now, like in one-on-ones, how they are developing, improvement areas like strengths. So we do recommend that that's sort of a continuous process, but that takes place outside of the assessment tool.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. And the reason I'm asking too is like, it's when the first time they see where they're rated and they know it's tied to compensation, it sort of hurts the ability for the growth and performance conversation to be effective, because somebody's so concentrated on compensation, right? And how their score is related to that. So I find it very important that you're talking about where you might be in those boxes throughout the year, so that there's no surprise, but also, the conversations can be focused on actually what you can do to get better and what you're doing right, those kinds of things.
Yes, fully agree. That's why we don't want any surprises. And also that's why we're recommending to do that check-in now, like sort of an informal check-in now, to ask the team members where they think they are at before we sort of move this to like the formal assessment at the year end. So we're totally aligned here.
Thank you.
Cool. Oliver, you had a question, your next question. Oh, sorry, I don't hear you, but maybe.
Sorry, still muted. No camera, no microphone. I'm on then. As described in the handbook, and let me quickly add the link there. For this fiscal year, the key talent was determined by the VP level, director level. Do we know if this year it will be different? Or will that be done by the same person?
Yeah, so we haven't totally thought this through, or at least I don't, that might sound off, but we haven't considered any changes to that process. So we will be reviewing whether that would be determined at the same level or at a different level. But there's no planned changes for that yet. Maybe, I'm not sure if other people, business partner, maybe Brittany has more context.
Yeah, I think that's right, Rose. We're kind of, as we get into that process, we'll look at how we did it previously and see if we are going to make iterations on it, and if we are, we'll communicate those out. But for now, it is as it was previously.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I might have a follow-up question. I haven't deeply thought about all the implication of that, but I'm curious if we are thinking about making that transparent, like identifying publicly who are the key talent in the company. Would that generate too much complication?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I think that would definitely be something we will take into account with that review that Carol mentioned, just to look at like, hey, what makes sense? Do we need to make any iterations or not? I can see pros and cons for both approaches, so that would be something we would need to review.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that is, you know, we always think about confidentiality of team members when we talk or think about performance, including like performance growth, etc. So, you know, that would be a huge consideration as to whether we would publicly go out with a list of, say, these are all the people that were determined as key talent.
Yeah. Good. All right, I see there are no other questions in the doc, so I'm going to quickly tell you a bit about the practicalities of breakout rooms. So we are all going to split up in breakout rooms, and the purpose of the breakout rooms is to discuss the scenarios which are on slide 20. So from slide 20, so 21, 22, 23, there are 3 scenarios in the slide deck, which we would ask all breakout rooms to discuss. And after 15 minutes, we'll come back to the main room and discuss any findings or anything the group wants, you were participating in wants to share. It might be a good idea to take some notes, right? To make sure you can share with the group after we finalized the breakouts. Juliana will communicate in the chat every 5 minutes that have passed. So you will be knowing like when you will return and when you're running out of time. Are there any questions on practicalities before we split up? All right. Well, I think we're going to stop the recording and we'll continue the recording when we get back from breakout groups.
All right, I think we have everybody back. So I hope you enjoyed your breakout conversations. We have about 13 minutes left in the call, and we're going to spend that time discussing as a group the different scenarios. So we'll go through scenario 1, which is around performance dip, have a conversation about that, move on to 2, move on to 3, etc. And really want to get an understanding from yourselves as to how you deal with the different situations, what the key takeaways were there any key watch outs? So that is pretty fluid format. So with that, we will go to performance dip. So this was scenario 1. And hand it over to you within the groups to talk about how you would have addressed that and what were the key takeaways.
I guess I can go first with my group. I'm always the first volunteer. So I think my group was a couple of new managers, a couple of veterans here at GitLab, and really was interesting to kind of hear some of the different perspectives. But for all the scenarios, really what we said was step one is you have to document that throughout your one-on-ones. The one-on-ones are so important, especially once you get to performance review season. If you're trying to think back on the last 6 months to evaluate this person, you need to have that reminder, if you will. And so with like scenario one, you'd be able to see that performance for the first 5 months and then that drop off and kind of see the patterns. And then number two being looking for, is that like that cause? Is there a skill gap that maybe we can address? Is there something going on in their personal life? Do they need time off? Don't just assume that the drop off in performance is, is like, I don't care and I don't want to work here and, whatever. Now that could be the case, but you won't, don't kind of jump to those conclusions until you actually have those kind of really deeper conversations on what the cause is. And then we kind of went from there on some of the situations, but those were really the key takeaways. Is the more you document in your one-on-one, the more successful you'll be at performance review time. And one of the other pieces of advice that I gave that I think is pretty valuable, so I'll share, is taking the next steps from your performance review and putting it in the agenda document for your one-on-one as a regular touch point every week. You may not talk about them every week, but what that does is it provides you and the team member an opportunity to add examples in real time of how they're accomplishing those next steps. And then again, at performance review time, you can go back and you'll have that in your agenda every week to reference back to on their growth. So really tying it back to the one-on-ones and documentation was the takeaway for our team. So unless my team would like to add anything else, please go ahead.
That's great, Megan. Thanks for sharing that. What about in the other groups? Is there anything you would add to what Megan has advised?
Our group was very similar to Megan's. The one thing that we also brought up was because this is recent over the last month, we don't want recency bias to affect the last year of review. What's happened the last month will obviously be top of mind because it just happened. So but we don't want that to color the entire year-long review.
For sure, super important. Thanks, John. Any other thoughts?
I would just add that recency bias works in the inverse as well, right? We all need to be careful that when somebody isn't performing, some people are actually pretty smart that they know the performance review is coming up, and you can start piling on some really good stuff in the last minute and affect a performance rating. So,
yeah, fair point. Thank you.
I would just suggest that one way to measure recency bias is how long have you been coaching the person on that problem? So if you've been coaching them on that problem for a year versus 2 months, that's a difference. And that can make the difference between developing, performing.
Absolutely, great point, Arpa. Okay, so I think what we're hearing here is it's looking at that, being mindful of the recency bias, both sides, and and making sure that you have performance documented in one-to-ones, thinking about how long you've been coaching somebody from that for that particular performance piece, and they're all great points. There is the piece around maybe contacting their previous manager as well and connecting with them and getting an understanding of how their performance has been fully holistically as well. That's probably one thing we would add on. And what you've all said is talking about being transparent and sharing your observations and making sure that you're having the conversations with the individual. So that sounds like a great way to approach this situation. So thank you all for your input on that. Just having a look at time, if we're good on scenario 1, we will hand over to scenario 2, and again kind of just go around the group and get input from you all on it. And this is about not just what gets done, but how it's done. So it's the behaviors and the results. So curious to hear how you aligned on what the next steps would be to assess both.
Hi, this is Tim Eidecker. I'll ring in for our group. Sorry to not be on video. This is the scenario in which the, remind me again, scenario 2, the low self-awareness.
Yes, it's yes,
okay.
the perform. Yeah, good.
I think ultimately, if I was sharing this with our small group when we got pulled back in, I think it was Jack Welch pushed this out about 30, 40 years ago, but it's essentially said in the world of work, you're going to have people in one of 4 spots classically, and think about it in performance and culture. People that are low match to our performance expectations and low match to culture, those are pretty easy to manage because they're typically going to be out. People that are really high performing and high culture embrace, those are fairly easy. Those are usually your top performers and your model for the team. It's those other 2 spots where you've got either high performance, low culture alignment, or low performance and high culture alignment. Those are where we classically spend our time as managers, and those are probably where we get to have our most growth as people leaders. This one felt to me like a high performance, low culture alignment. And I think we're also potentially dealing with an employee who's been, we feel like we have explained the challenge, the gap, and the issue, and he or she may have heard it, or they may have heard it from multiple spots, but it doesn't seem to actually be resulting in change. And so I would say what mechanisms you may feel are conveying these important messages are not landing with your team member. And so figuring out what other way you can bring that to their attention, and then give them 1 or 2 things, ideally that are from their idea, but 1 or 2 things that you need to see taken into effect in the short term to demonstrate that they're acknowledging they are high performing in a lot of respects, but not a really great culture fit or aligned to our culture values, excuse me. Tracy, anything you would add to what we unpacked in our session?
Nope, you summed it up well. Thank you.
I think too, Tim, just to kind of piggyback off of your comment, is that you also have to consider the optics of people that are giving that feedback and the performance of the individuals that are giving that feedback as well. Oftentimes I feel that there are opportunities for other team members to maybe give feedback that takes a lens off of them as well. And so you need to consider if you have other high performance, high culture individuals on the team that are giving you that feedback, I would be very apt to listen to that feedback. If I had someone that was maybe not as strong of a performer giving me that feedback, that is an attempt to maybe mirror the insecurities of that team member onto another team member who may be high performing. Now, that said, with the ego portion of it, that's a really tricky one, because you have to give people measurable, like qualitative and quantitative ways to help them get through that, and feedback that will be, that will work for them, to your point, right? Like, it has to be measurable and a means for them to have triggers to say, oh gosh, I'm doing it again, I need to take a step back, right? And then one of the, Brittany on our team also mentioned or actually everyone mentioned this, is to actually give feedback when they've done it well, or when they've had handled a situation that they may have handled poorly before well this time, to give that immediate feedback, to let them know, hey, that's what I'm looking for. That's what meets expectation.
I love that, Sarah. Good to see you again, by the way.
Yeah, you too.
That's great. Thanks, Tim and Sarah. Any other thoughts on scenario 2? Okay, well, yeah, I mean, we would agree with all the points that you've made. I think that they're all are aligned, and really, it's helping people understand that it's not just the what, but it's the how, and that being unable to take feedback and being unable to hear what compliments people are giving you is going to have an impact on the overall performance, because performance isn't just the what. So I think that's the other call out that we would make there. And we have 2 minutes left, so we're just going to, apologies for the timing of this, but go quickly to make sure that we get a chance to talk about scenario 3, which is somebody who was recently promoted, and you're coming up now to talent assessment reviews, and great to get your thoughts on what the next steps would be on how to fairly evaluate them. So I'll hand it back to you for the last 2 minutes.
One of the things that we mentioned was really looking at what the 90-day expectation was when the person transitioned into the role, and maybe doing a little retro of what's been achieved in those 90 days in terms of what was set out, both from the team member and the manager's expectations.
Thanks, Beverly. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, just as we finish up, because we're coming up on time, just to close this one out, is that thanks, Beverly, that developing doesn't necessarily equate to underperformance. So somebody who's being promoted can often be promoted and they'll go into the developing, or sometimes they will be in the performing or growing piece. It does depend on the situation. So it's really, as a manager, making sure that we're communicating what developing means, and it's typically in a very positive way when somebody has been promoted. And I think we're at time. We are probably, I know people are dropping off now, but we appreciate you joining the call. We will send out some more communication around this over the coming weeks, and welcome any feedback that you have. I think at this stage now, given the timing, for how the section or session worked and how we can improve for going forward. So thank you all. Thanks, Rose, Denise, and Juliana, and Brittany for being on the call.
Thanks,
as well
everyone.
here. Thank you. Bye.